Look, the Chinese are not idiots. And have you ever heard some of Vladimir Putin? Putin knows exactly what's going on. He's called out the U.S. for, this con for years. And we've driven Russia and China a lot closer together. They're a lot closer now than they were, years ago.
Yes.
They obviously have a plan. I'm just surprised that they've, allowed this to go on for as long as they have.
Welcome to the Main Street Capitalist Show. I'm your host, Russell Gray, and I'm super excited today because I'm sitting down with my good buddy, Peter Schiff. And if you don't know Peter wrote this book here called Crash Proof, and he wrote it in 2004, 2005, I think, started writing it.
Yeah, 2005.
Something like that, okay. And then predicting the what turned out to be the great financial crisis. Everybody thought you were a lunatic. Anyway, Peter, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Russell, for having me, and congratulations on your new endeavor.
Yeah, excited about it. So I have so many things I want to talk about, but I found this in a used bookstore. I paid $5 for it. So I'd read Crash Proof 2.0, and it's not a secret. Anybody follows me knows that I lost everything in 2008 because I was over-levered in real estate. Didn't know you back then, and since then got to know you. But let's just go back to the beginning. Your big claim to fame is really that you were warning, you were screaming from the rooftops, danger, Will Robinson.
It's too bad somebody sold that, though, as a used, but they should have kept it in a collection.
Well, it's in my collection now. I'm going to have you sign it for me here.
I mean, it looks brand new. I wonder if the guy that owned it even really read it.
Yeah, that's, it's funny. Isn't that funny? People put their great ideas in a book and people don't bother to read them. Like I could live 1,000 years and not read all the books I want to read. My library is busting at the seams. But just to explain to everybody, how did you know this was going to happen?
Well, to me, it was pretty obvious. It's more like, how could everybody else not have known it was going to happen? And I think it's because of the psychology of a bubble. When you're inside the bubble, you don't recognize it. But I was outside looking in, and I could clearly see what was going on objectively, and not, have my mind distracted by the greed. And, everybody was involved in it, and everybody was making money. Either you owned a home, you wanted to own a home, or you're in some way involved in mortgage and financing and government. And it was just a mass delusion that everybody had, that real estate had no risk, that the price could only go up. Didn't matter, where the prices were in the past. If they had gone up, they would just always go up. They would never go back down. And I just knew that was ridiculous, that, prices would eventually come down. And I saw what was happening with the lending. But I also understood that interest rates, which were, driving the whole thing, because you had rates at 1% and then 1.5%, 2%, and the Fed was keeping rates low. And I could see that people were taking out these adjustable rate mortgages, and they had teaser rates that would be good for a couple of years or a few years. But then I knew that the people who bought homes using these teaser rates would not be able to afford to make the payments when the rates reset. And I knew that at the time, nobody really cared, because people thought, well, who cares if I can make the payments? I'll just refinance or I'll sell. I just got to get into a house because the price is going to go up. And I just kept thinking about, well, but all these people are going to be in the same boat. They're all going to be trying to sell their houses. Who's going to buy them, especially if rates are higher? And so it just seemed like it was an obvious crisis. I could see all the bad actors in the appraisal industry and the securitization industry, Wall Street and subprime and Fannie and Freddie. I mean, it just all made sense to me that it would eventually implode. Now, I knew that the government would try to bail everybody out, but I also thought that it was possible that the government would try to prevent what I thought was coming from happening. And the reason they didn't is because they didn't even realize it was going to happen. So the government was so oblivious to it, the Fed was so oblivious, that they didn't do anything to prevent it. They just waited until all the horses were out of the barn to try to close the doors. But they responded exactly the way I forecast they would in the book. I didn't know that they were going to call it QE, but I knew that that's what they were going to do. And I knew, they were going to try to bail everybody out and print money and buy up all the bad debt and reflate the bubble, which is exactly what they did. But the book that I wrote after that, although I wrote a couple more, but the main sequel is the real crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy. And the real crash, the title referred to the actual crash that Crash Proof was referring to. Because even though Crash Proof warned about the housing bubble and the financial crisis that would ensue when it popped, that crisis was not the crash that I was preparing people for. That crash hadn't even happened yet. Because the book basically said, after the housing market collapses, the government's going to do all this stuff. And the result of all that stuff is going to be a dollar crisis. And the dollar's going to collapse. And the bond market's going to collapse because of all the debt we're going to take on and all the money we're going to print following the bursting of the housing bubble.
But they kicked the can farther down the road than I think anybody thought they could.
Well, certainly more than me. I mean,
Yeah.
I knew there was going to be a can, and I knew they would try to kick it. I just didn't know that they could kick it this far. But I think the real crash is started. I mean, I think that's why gold is $4,000 an ounce. That's why bonds fell and yields rose following the last Fed rate cuts. Not the most recent ones, although they've risen again since then.
Yeah.
But when the Fed first started cutting, kind of towards the end of the Biden administration, yields started to rise, which was the opposite of what everybody expected other than me. So I think the market is now starting to get rid of treasuries, starting to get rid of dollars, replacing dollars with gold. And I think that is setting in motion the real crash. We still haven't seen it.
Peter, when you say the market, right, because we have, the institutions and the people in the United States, whether from the retail all the way up, but you also have the foreigners. And with the United States, world's reserve currency.
Yeah, it's a global market. So you're talking about all the various participants. But the United States relies very heavily on foreigners to finance our debt and to supply us with goods that we don't manufacture. And so that's the dynamic that I think is going to collapse, where we're not going to be able to rely on the dollar anymore to live beyond our means, to consume what we don't produce, and borrow what we don't save. And, when you hear someone like, President Trump discuss, trade and this relationship we have with the U.S., he's got it completely backwards. He thinks that the world is ripping us off and taking advantage of us when it's the other way around.
I remember when you were running for Senate and hearing you explain that the very first time is one day the Chinese are going to wake up and realize, hey, wait a minute, we get up every day and we work and we send these people real stuff and they're sending us these pieces of paper they're printing out of nothing.
Right, and Trump still thinks that we're the ones getting the raw deal. He wants us to do the work ourselves and to produce the stuff. Well, that's hard work. Where are we going to get the factories? Where are we going to get the supply chains? Where are we going to get the infrastructure? Where are we going to get the workers? Right, all that takes resources, time, effort. Right now, we got the Chinese doing all that for us.
Yeah.
And we're trying to upset that apple cart by accusing them of ripping us off because they're supplying us with all this stuff, and we don't really have to pay for it. We just print money, and they accept it. And then what do? This is, it's even more perverse because we print money out of thin air and send it to the Chinese in exchange for all the stuff that they produced that, required real effort and real resources that could have been devoted to something else, but instead they devoted it to making stuff for us. And then we give them these dollars, and then what do? They loan them right back to us. They buy treasuries, they buy mortgage-backed securities, maybe they buy some stocks. So all that money just gets recycled into the financial markets, propping up our asset prices, propping up stocks, real estate bonds. So we feel richer, and we get lower interest rates. I mean, the whole U.S. economy is predicated on recycled trade deficits. But Trump wants to end those trade deficits, which, the trade deficits in and of themselves are not the problem. The problem is what's causing the trade deficits. The trade deficits are the consequence of the problem, right? And they've been a warning sign of a problem for a long time, but everybody has ignored it. I mean, I was very, I pointed that out in my book about the trade deficits, but it's because of the uncompetitiveness of the U.S. economy And a lot of that is driven by Fed policy of artificially low interest rates, which means we don't have enough savings, which means we don't have enough capital investment, and a lot of other regulations that stifle, our productivity relative to other countries that don't have to deal with those regulations and that have a lot more savings with which to finance the capital investment. And so we've ended up, relying on those other countries to produce all the things that we're not producing. And they're doing it because of the dollar's reserve status. But once that status is gone, well, then they're not going to need dollars anymore. And if they don't need dollars, then why sell us stuff? Normally, you export to import other goods, right? Countries focus on producing what they're best at. And then they trade the excess, right, the surplus goods, with people in other countries who produce other goods more efficiently than they do and who want the goods that the other countries produced. And everybody wins because everybody gets more stuff because you focus on what you do best and then trade with somebody else who does something else better than you. But with the trade with the U.S., we're not giving anybody goods, we're giving them dollars, which is fine when they want dollars because it's the reserve currency. But when it's not, then they're not going to trade with us.
That's like a light switch. And so there's a couple of things here. One is, for me as an observer, and I didn't really care about all this until after I didn't know about your book. I didn't know about you.
Yeah.
Got my rear end handed to me. And then I said, okay, being ignorant of this on Main Street's dangerous, right? Whatever went on, I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. And so I started really studying it and started listening to you and started coming to conferences like this. We're at the New Orleans Investment Conference. And he began to explain this stuff to me. But one of the things that I'm curious about, because I really want to talk about sound money. And we sit on a panel. We're going to be on a panel this year again, right? Future money.
Oh, yeah, future money.
Future money.
Were you
panel.
on that panel last year?
I'm going to be on that panel. We were on that panel last year with you and Larry.
Yeah, were you the moderator last year?
No,
too?
I was sitting in between the two of you. Taggart was
Taggart, that's right.
Yeah,
and Taggart's
he's
doing
gonna
it
do
again
this year. So I think Danielle isn't with us. We're going to have.
Well, Danielle was on the panel, the economic panel.
Yeah, so Brent Johnson's going to be with us this time.
Okay.
So it's going to be you, me, Brent, and Larry Lepard.
So he's the same guy?
Your buddy Larry, yeah.
All right, yeah.
So
okay.
we'll have fun. But I do think one of the things I want to ask you, because I listened to your show and I've heard you speak many, many times, and I want to try and get some things maybe that I haven't heard you talk about before. And two things are, is it possible to even fix the system, fix the debt, as long as we have unsound money? I have a thesis that as long as we have unsound money, meaning that the money is borrowed into existence, that it's not possible to fix the system. The system is fundamentally flawed. And from what you see, do you think anybody's making a concerted effort, either in the United States or globally, to somehow get the world back onto a sound money system, like when the world was on a gold standard prior to 1971?
Well, we're certainly not doing that in the U.S. There's no incentive or motivation to do that. We're exploiting the system that we have now because we're the primary beneficiaries of the dollar status. But I certainly think that a number of countries outside the United States have decided to divest of dollars. They're not doing it overnight. It's a process. And they are replacing their dollars with gold. So I do think that you have other countries that want to go back to gold as the reserve asset for their currencies. And so that process is underway. We'll see how long it takes to play out.
Now, is that BRICS? Is that what you're the BRICS?
Well, a lot of the
BRICS
BRIC
plus?
nations, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's just the BRICS, but obviously, China and Russia and India are big, buyers of gold, and they've been, reducing their holdings of treasuries. In fact, we reduced Russia's holdings ourselves with the sanctions,
yes, we did.
Which is part of what prompted the exodus or sped it up. Because people could see that there's extra motivation, not just economic but political motivation, to divest. But certainly there's no movement in the United States. In fact, President Trump wants to exploit it even more. He wants more money printing. He wants the Fed to slash interest rates so that we can have even more cheap money. You know, there's nothing. He doesn't want to do anything to try to restore sound money.
So I have a theory, and I want to see what you think about this. I think when I'm looking at Trump and what he's doing, I see a real estate guy approaching the economy like a real estate renovation project. And before you can rebuild, you have to demolish. And I think he is dismantling some things and willing to go into debt and spend money to do it, because that's the way a real estate guy thinks, with the idea that they're going to come in and replace it. And I'm thinking maybe there might be a plan to save the dollar system by putting by backing the dollar, maybe by a pool of gold and or Bitcoin.
I don't know. I wouldn't read that much into it. I think that Trump is treating the presidency as, an extension of his business. It's he can exploit it to his advantage, to the advantage of his family and his close friends and allies. I think there's probably never been a presidency where so much money has been made by the people in the administration and close to the administration. And so I think everything is kind of being done from the perspective of, what's in it for me? Like, how am I going to make myself and my family richer? What deals can I do that will benefit our business interests? I think that's really what's guiding the administration.
Interesting.
From crypto, to all the deals that are being made. I mean, to the extent that Trump believes the deals benefit the country, I think that's secondary. And whether they do or not is debatable. But I think the primary motivation is personal gain. And I think that's an attitude that's pervasive in the administration. And it's very frustrating because there was a lot of criticism of the Bidens. And it was the criticism was valid of the Bidens and Hunter, and the way Hunter was exploiting his father's role, mainly as vice president initially, for personal gain, basically selling influence and access that his father had. But he at least, of course, tried to cover it up, right? I mean, he had the decency to set up shell companies and launder the bribes. But what the Trump administration and the Republicans have done is just put it all out in the open, and therefore claim that it's okay. As long as we disclose that we've been bribed, then there's nothing wrong with it. And it seems like anything goes now. If you want something, you can buy the president off, and you haven't done anything wrong. You can outright give Trump bars of gold, or you could just buy his meme coin and whatever, right? And you could get what you want as long as you cut Trump in on the deal or his organization. So it's unfortunate, and there's so many hypocrites now because the Republicans refuse to call it out. Because Trump is still popular within the Republican Party. He's got a lot of support.
Yeah.
And so he can get away with a lot because of that. But the problem is, the economy is in bad shape. Trump goes around and he talks about how we're having the biggest boom in our history. We have the strongest economy ever. We have the hottest economy in the world. Meanwhile, the most recent poll numbers show that Trump's approval rating on the economy is the lowest it's ever been for both presidencies, right?
Wow.
It's something like 30% approval. I think 60% actively disapprove. So it's not just Democrats, a lot of independents and Republicans. And so, that's, I think, a more accurate reflection on the economy than Trump just claiming that it's the greatest economy ever. And especially since, according to Trump, last year was the worst economy ever. So America went from the worst economy in history to the best economy of history in just less than a year, all because of him. And if the economy was so bad and now it's so great, you would think more people would be giving him credit. right? They wouldn't be, giving him such low marks on approval. So, it's all, I think it's all PR, it's all promotion. I mean, Trump just says this just like he's selling his steaks, right? He's selling everybody on his presidency. It's a great, successful presidency because we have the greatest economy in the world, in the history of the world. All the presidents before me were a bunch of fools. I'm the only guy that knows what he's doing. I've negotiated these fantastic deals. I've gotten rid of inflation. He says, there's no more inflation. I've beaten inflation. He hasn't beaten anything. Inflation is beating us. We've surrendered against inflation.
Let's talk about the global financial system, right? 1971, Nixon broke the gold standard. The Europeans saw it, and they said, well, we got to create some type of an alternative. They created the euro. 99 or so, they finally got it over the line, and the world, Saddam Hussein tried to embrace it as to replace the petrodollar. That didn't end well for him. But then now China, after 2009, I think, after the Fed's balance sheet grew from 800 billion to 4.5 trillion in the GFC, they began a concerted effort to de-dollarize, and that was really the beginning of the movement. You pointed out earlier that when we weaponized the financial system against Russia, that really kind of woke everybody up. Then you had the Basel III making gold a tier 1 asset. Gold is finally replaced, at least in terms of dollar values, dollar on the balance sheet. But we allegedly are on the cusp, as we're recording this, of this great trade deal with China. And Trump has been overtly, from the moment he got elected, not even inaugurated, he was very hostile towards the BRICS in any effort to undermine the dollar. Where do you think China is going with what they're doing with respect to the dollar and the global financial system? And then ultimately, how does that all roll downhill on Main Street where we all live?
Yeah, well, first of all, yes, we took the world off the gold standard in 71. We didn't just leave it ourselves. We took the entire world off of it because the dollar was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand in gold. So even though the dollar was the reserve currency, the world was still using gold through the dollar as a reserve. So we took the whole world off of that. And I think now the world is going off the dollar standard. We put the world on the dollar standard, the world is going off. And I think they're going back to the gold standard because I think that's what works. You have to have something that backs up your currency.
Right.
And a lot of people have been very complacent about the dollar's role, thinking that no matter what we did, the world was stuck with the dollar. Our money, your problem. And the rationale was there's nothing to replace it.
I think that's Brent Johnson's position, has been for a long time.
But the reason they make the mistake is they overlook gold. They look at the euro, they look at the yen or the pound, and they say those currencies have problems. And they say the dollar is the cleanest dirty shirt in the hamper, right? Admitting that the dollar is a dirty shirt, just claiming that it's not as dirty as the alternatives.
Right.
But they forget about the one asset that's not in that hamper, and that's gold. And that's what's going to replace the dollar. That's what is replacing the dollar. And that has profound implications for the U.S. Because we're the ones that gain the most from that relationship. I've pointed out that the rest of the world actually suffers from this. It's a burden because if we get to live beyond our means, that means the rest of the world collectively is living beneath their means. If we get to consume more, then they have to consume less to allow that. And if we're borrowing a lot of money that we don't save, that means the rest of the world has to save a lot of money they don't borrow, right? So we're getting a lot of benefits to the detriment. Now you can say, well, it's worth it because they get to use the dollar, but I mean, what do you mean they get to use it? I mean, they don't need to use it.
But don't we export our inflation, right? Because if we have everybody holding dollars, we don't even necessarily have to borrow from them. We just print dollars out of thin air, and it dilutes everybody all around the world that are holding dollars.
But they do loan them back because if we print money and send them abroad, right? If they sent the dollars back to us to buy goods, that would push up our prices. So the way we're able to keep inflation from pushing up good prices is by having foreigners take the dollars they earn and invest in our assets instead of buying our goods. And that way the inflation ends up on Wall Street. So you see stock
And even
prices
on Main
going
Street
up.
with real estate.
Well, with real estate, right?
Yeah.
Because they buy properties, right? And so
And they buy gold.
yeah, well, it doesn't help us when they buy gold, right? That we don't want them to buy gold. I mean, but that's what they're doing now because they're getting wise to the con.
And do you think China is actually, do you think what they report to hold for gold is what they actually hold, or are you of the...
I doubt it. I mean, I generally don't believe governments, and it's not, I don't believe our government, but I don't, believe the Chinese government either. But I believe, given that China is the world's largest gold producer, and there's a lot of gold that they produce, China doesn't export gold. So all that gold that they produce is staying in China.
And they import.
Right. So my guess is that a lot of the production is being bought by the Chinese government. It's not all the peasants that are buying, or not just peasants. There's plenty of wealthy people in China. They have a vibrant middle class.
Chinese Main Street.
Yeah. But I'm sure the government, and if I was the Chinese government, and my goal was to replace the dollar with gold and maybe one day announce to the world that our currency is now tied to gold officially at a set rate that the government will defend and that it has the gold to back it up.
So this
right?
is gradually and then suddenly.
Right. And if it was my goal to accumulate a lot of gold, I would not be honest about how much I had.
So you think they have more than they're
I think
reporting?
they have, yeah.
Okay.
I think
So
they have. And the thing is, we may have less. We may be overstating the goal. That's why.
So that brings up something else. So when Trump and Bissett came out and they're like, hey, we're going to audit the gold, audit the gold, audit the gold, and then crickets.
Yeah.
I feel like it was like, okay, guys, I know that the gold isn't really there. This is just me speculating, right? I know all the gold's not really there. We're going to tell you we're going to audit and freak you out, and then we're going to give you time to put it back. And then all of a sudden you see the gold price rising, and I just wonder, is that whoever had the gold trying to replace the gold? Could that be a thing?
I don't know. Look. First they wanted the Epstein files. They, then what Epstein files? He's, all of a sudden, So they're like Trump administration backtrack on a lot of things, right? Like Doge, right? Look at what happened with Elon Musk, right? Trump said a lot of things to get elected, and he knew what are all the key issues that will motivate. I mean, he promised that if he got elected, he was going to eliminate the taxation on all the expats, right? To get everybody that was, all the Americans. Because I can't vote in Puerto Rico, but Americans who live in Europe or South America, every place else can still vote absentee. And Trump promised to stop taxing them, to end the worldwide taxation. Of course, as soon as he won, that promise was gone. So, he made, so a lot of groups, were lied to. Now, some of the promises he's kept were the crypto promises. And I think one of the reasons he kept those is because he made a fortune off of those. Because crypto became the Trump family business. Right. Forget real estate.
It's actually, when I heard, even bigger than the real estate business.
They've made
now.
more money. Trump and his family have made more money in the last year than they've made in any year in the history of the Trump organization. So this is the huge home run. This is bigger than The Apprentice. This is bigger than anything Trump has done. And what did he actually create of any real value? Nothing. All he did was create meme coins, worthless tokens, and sell them, and got some other deals where other crypto industry to just basically, suck off of the people that were dumb enough to buy the tokens. Now, some of the people weren't buying the tokens because they were dumb. They were bribing Trump. And so if you wanted to get Trump to do something, you just bought the token, and then he did it. Although now, his kids have a bar in D.C., the executive branch. And it's like a $500,000 initiation fee, and I forget what the monthly fees are. But that's basically the cost to bribe them. Because you get to go and have lunch with members of his staff. And people are not paying $500,000 to have lunch with the president's cabinet just to, chew the shit. They're not there to talk sports.
Right.
But it's so flagrant and out in the open. But I don't know what happened on the audit, the Fed, because, Trump wanted to get...
Audit the Fed or audit the gold?
Or the gold. That's all
gold.
part of it. Because Trump, obviously, got support from the Ron Paul wing, the Tea Party, and those are some of the issues that we have as far as end the Fed and audit the Fed and even a lot of the people in the crypto community, because they claim that Bitcoin is digital gold. One of the reasons that they claim we need to buy Bitcoin is because the Fed really doesn't even have the gold to back up the dollar, and so the dollar could collapse. So you should buy Bitcoin, right? That's what they say. So Trump had those people pressing for him. Hey, let's audit. Let's do an audit. And it was also part of the Doge, because Doge was like, auditing departments. Hey, let's audit. Let's count up the gold, right? We're looking at all this government waste. But the fact that they dropped it like a hot potato and never brought it up again makes you think that they got a little information that you really don't want to do this. Because what is the upside? Either we confirm that we have the gold that everybody already thinks we have, or a bunch of people who think we have gold find out the truth that we don't actually have it. So either they were told
and
for
then
sure.
You marry that to China.
Oh, yeah.
Right now we're like teed up, kind of art of war. Right?
But the price of gold would have gone up dramatically. It'd be way above. If they audited the U.S. government and they found out that we didn't have the gold, if half of it wasn't there, or who knows, maybe not, maybe it's all gone. Who the hell knows, right? But the price of gold would soar, because it would mean there's a lot less gold in the world than we thought, because the gold that we thought the U.S. government has, it doesn't have anymore. It's already sold it. It's already out in the supply, and we don't have it to sell.
And being double counted, because you're saying it's here, but it's also there's leasing.
But also there's this move to revalue the gold.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about how that could actually work.
Well, I mean, gold, ever since Roosevelt devalued the dollar in 1933, when gold was $20 an ounce, and Roosevelt devalued to 35, it stayed at 35 until Nixon. And before Nixon took us off the gold standard, he tried a couple of devaluations. There were, I think, 2 devaluations, and the last one left the price of gold at $42.44.
Right.
I guess they liked the number 4. And it went off 45, but 42.44 was the official price of gold. But then they just closed the gold window. So they haven't officially devalued, but obviously there's been an unofficial devaluation, because you need $4,000 to buy an ounce of gold. You can't buy an ounce of gold for $42. And so all they would have to do is devalue again officially and say that gold is now 4,000. But that doesn't actually change anything, because that's the price. And the government won't give you any gold for your dollars at $42.22 an ounce. So if they say now we won't give you any at 4,000, again, nothing has changed.
Right.
But what a lot of the Bitcoin people are trying to get out of this is that if the U.S. government revalues the gold, they either want the government to then sell the gold, because right now, I mean, technically, if it sold it, right, it would be selling it at $42, right? That'd be dumb. But if they revalue it, but I think what they're really saying is, we don't want you to sell it per se, but we want you to go to the Fed with that gold and say, hey, here's $1 trillion worth of gold that we've got, because right now it's worth a lot less. Give us $1 trillion in cash. We're going to pledge this gold to the Fed as collateral. We want you to give us a bunch of cash. And then they want the government to take that cash that the Fed just printed and go out and buy Bitcoin with it. Which, of course, would just create a lot of inflation, because now they would be handing all that cash to the Bitcoin hodlers,
right,
who would then take that cash and buy stuff. And the U.S. taxpayer would be left holding the bag of these overpriced Bitcoin. Because the real reason that the Bitcoin community wants the U.S. government to buy Bitcoin is to make the price of Bitcoin go up. And the only reason that Trump is supporting it is for the same reason. Because his whole company now, Trump DJ Media, which hit a new 52-week low today, so the stock's been going down, but that whole company has been reinvented as a Bitcoin treasury company. Forget about Truth Social. It's got nothing to do with that. The business model is buying Bitcoin. But getting back to the whole thing, so it won't really accomplish anything to officially revalue gold. It's just an official admission that the dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1971,
yeah,
where gold now costs $4,000 and not $44. So it's embarrassing for the United States, I guess, officially to have to admit how much the dollar has, depreciated over those 50 some odd years. But it doesn't fundamentally change anything. But you would think, though, that if they were going to try to do something, they would at least have to count up how much gold they actually had, right?
Do you see the U.S. financial system at an advantage or a disadvantage to the Chinese? Because I feel like the Chinese are developing a financial system to take on the U.S.'s dominance in the financial system. And are we vulnerable? And if we are, again, what does that look like on Main Street?
Yeah, look, I think China's in a much better position than the Trump administration understands, or at least pretends to understand. I think that if you're the manufacturer, if you're the producer and the creditor, you're in a stronger position than the debtor and the
where
the
we
consumer.
were in '44 when we became the world's reserve currency.
Right. Well, at that point, we were the big manufacturer, we were the big exporter, we were the big creditor. We're the mirror image of that right now. I mean, the world would never have accepted the dollar as the reserve if the U.S. was in the same condition back then as it is today. I mean, it would have been. It wouldn't have even been. You couldn't even mention that. It would be nonsense. But because we produced everything and we were so wealthy in our manufacturing and our exports that everybody needed dollars. They needed dollars to buy all our cars and to buy our television sets and our radios, and everything was made in America. Everything that people wanted was made in America.
Yeah, well, when I opened my Amazon shipment, 75-80% of it is China, and as long as that's the case, I'm like, I hear people say they have a weak economy. I don't get it. I hear people say that they're weak financially, but I'm with you. I think they have a lot of gold. And then you read The Art of War, and you think, to appear weak when you're strong and strong when you're weak. And I'm thinking, could this be a situation where they're systematically organizing a worldwide revolt or a de-dollarization, and then there will be a moment when the announcement comes, and it goes from, we talked earlier, gradually to suddenly. If that moment were to come, would there be any precursors? I feel like the rising price of gold and the decreasing amount of treasury holdings.
I mean, that's already it. Look, the Chinese are not idiots, right? And have you ever heard some of Vladimir Putin? Putin knows exactly what's going on. He's called out the U.S. for, this con for years. And we've driven Russia and China a lot closer together. They're a lot more closer now than they were, years ago.
Yes.
So, I mean, they obviously have a plan. I'm just surprised that they've, allowed this to go on for as long as they have. I think they would have been better off jettisoning the dollar a long time ago and just not exporting to us, just consuming what they produce.
But if they were to do that, they would, in a lot of ways, devastate the United States.
They would.
And that would be to their detriment if they can ease the United States into submission.
I don't think it would be to their detriment, because I don't think what
they just sell their stuff to themselves or the other people in the BRICS alliance.
I don't know what we bring to the table. All we have is a bunch of Americans who just spend the money the Fed prints. I mean, what's that?
Right, because it comes from our stocks and our equities, which are basically all inflated.
There are a billion people in China, or they got triple our population, so they're not in need of consumers. And it's not like the Chinese don't want stuff. And if the dollar crashed and the Chinese RMB tripled, then all the Chinese would have our purchasing power, which they deserve anyway, because they're the ones that are producing all the stuff that we consume. So I just think that it's the producer and the saver that drive the economic train. We're just along for the ride in the caboose. You could cut off the caboose and the train's going to keep moving. But if you take away the engine, the caboose is not going to go anywhere. And that's us. We're the caboose. And they could either consume more of what they produced or trade more. And in fact, if you look at a lot of the recent trade statistics that have come out of China, overall trade in the last year is up quite a bit, both imports and exports. At the same time, trade with America is down significantly. So China is trading less with America, but they're trading more with everybody else.
Yeah, I saw that. Yes.
And so how is China being hurt by that, right? But we're, obviously we're getting fewer Chinese goods. So, what are we buying? Or who are we buying from instead of China? But whatever we're buying less of it, and we're paying more for it.
So let's close with this, because I think your buddy Adrian Day here is actually coming in for an interview.
Oh, cool.
But let's just talk about Main Street, right? If I'm a person on Main Street running my business, living my life, and I want to prepare myself for the possibility that China pulls the nuclear weapon, not the bomb, but the one that undermines the dollar. Mm-hmm. What do I need to own, or how can I position myself so that if that were to happen, I have a contingency that's going to help see me through?
Yeah, well, we're talking about gold. So one of the things you can do is own gold and silver, own it as a store of value. And, so you can buy that. My company, Schiff Gold, right? You can buy physical gold. But also, I think eventually to use gold as a means of exchange. And I think more and more people, as the dollar really starts to lose value, particularly people who have things to sell, they're selling services, they're selling products, they're not going to want to get paid in a currency that's rapidly depreciating. So I think there's going to be a preference to be paid in real money, which is why I'm helping to build out the platform on Schiff Gold, where you can, in addition to having gold delivered, we'll store it for you, but we'll store it in a way that it is accessible to be used in commerce, so that you can send and receive gold, among other people that have accounts who can, where you can pay and be paid in gold. And ultimately, I'll link it to a debit card or a credit card, and then even a token where you can withdraw tokenized gold, and you can exchange those tokens with anybody else who has a wallet that can receive it. You use one of the various blockchains to transmit it, but you'll have ownership, because a gold token will represent ownership of actual gold. Just like Federal Reserve notes used to represent ownership of gold, right? A digital token can represent ownership of gold. And in order for me and you to do business with each other, in order for me to pay you, if I own gold and I want to pay, and you want me to pay you gold to do something, I don't have to send you the actual gold. I can just send you the certificate that proves that I own it. If it's a bearer instrument, whoever owns the certificate has title to the gold. I don't have to move the gold. I just send you the proof that now you own it.
Gotcha.
And now you don't have to go down and get the gold. You could, you can give it the token to somebody else, and it can circulate as a substitute for gold.
The token just replaces the gold certificate in the old days.
Yes.
But it's more efficient.
It's significantly more efficient, because I don't have to be in the room with you to hand it to you. I can electronically transfer it. So that's one thing. So, and you can, I have a web, if you go to T-Gold, just tgold.com, you'll go directly to the account page to set that up. But then also, I think if I'm right about this transition of global purchasing power, and where the dollar is, the U.S. is going to be knocked down several notches on the global totem pole, and the emerging market consumer is going to be enriched when he is relieved of the burden of supporting the Americans, the rest of the world is going to prosper. They're going to find, their standard of living is going to go up. They're going to get to consume more, and they're going to be able to invest their money in their own economies rather than in ours. And so if you have an investment portfolio of companies that are going to benefit from that, right, I think you're going to do very well. And so we have portfolios. I have 5 mutual funds that people can buy no load at any discount broker. We do separately managed accounts. Adrian, in fact, manages our gold strategies.
We just lost him.
Oh, Adrian.
He's going to have to come back. But
we also have
Good
dividend.
thing his boss was here taking up his time.
We have dividend-paying strategies and global value strategies. People can go to europac.com to get information. Talk to our representatives about how we can help manage a portfolio, or you can manage it yourself utilizing my mutual funds, and you can get all the information on my funds at europac.com website.
And of course, they should listen to the Peter Schiff podcast, which I've been listening to for 10 years now. So, Peter Schiff, thank you so much. Appreciate you being
Russell,
here
great.
on the Main Street Capitalist Show.
So that's the one and only Peter Schiff. To join me at the next New Orleans Investment Conference, send your email and comments to neworleans@mainstreetcapitalist.com. And be sure to check out my other great conversations from the New Orleans Investment Conference, including Mike Maloney, Mark Skousen, Adam Taggart, Brian London, plus the Future of Money panel I was on with Peter Schiff, Larry Lepard, and Mr. Dollar Milkshake himself, Brent Johnson. Check it out.